I spent 4 years and $210,000 buying my parents the house they always dreamed of. 3 days before closing, I found the folder they thought I'd never see, and it wasn't a folder about moving in. It was a folder about moving me out. Out of the will. Out of the family business. Out of their lives the second the deed was signed. If you think blood makes people loyal, stick with me till the end, because what my own mother said into that phone call is going to make you check the locks on your own front door. My name is Mallory Ashworth. I'm 29 years old, I live in Denver, Colorado, and for most of my life I was the daughter who fixed things. When my father's roofing business nearly went under during the recession, I was the one who took a second job at 19 and handed him envelopes of cash every Friday. When my mother needed a kidney donor evaluation, I was the one who flew home from my work trip in Seattle without being asked twice. And when they mentioned, just once almost as a joke, that they'd always dreamed of retiring in a lake house up near Estes Park, I quietly started saving. Took 4 years. I picked up freelance consulting work on weekends, I skipped vacations, I drove a car with 200,000 miles on it while my friends leased new SUVs. And when I finally had enough for a solid down payment on a beautiful 3-bedroom cabin-style home on Lake Estes, I didn't tell them right away. I wanted it to be perfect. I wanted to hand them the keys on my father's 60th birthday and watch his face. I should have known something was wrong the moment my younger brother Grant started calling our parents every single day. Grant, who hadn't visited home in over a year, who owed me $11,000 I never once asked him to repay, who suddenly couldn't stop talking about family legacy and protecting what's ours. I should have known when my mother Denise started asking strange questions about the deed, whose name would be on it, who would have control of the property, whether I planned to live there myself one day. I didn't know. Not yet. I was too busy being proud of myself. Too busy imagining the look on my father Roger's face when I handed him a key on a ribbon. 3 days before closing, I drove to their house to drop off paperwork my father needed to sign. He wasn't home. My mother was in the kitchen, and her laptop was open on the counter, still logged into her email. I wasn't snooping. I was reaching for a pen. And that's when I saw the subject line that stopped my hand midair. Ashworth Family Trust, removing Mallory as beneficiary before property transfer. Stick with me because what I read in that email, and what I heard 20 minutes later when my mother didn't know I was still in the house, is the reason I stopped being the daughter who fixes everything, and became the daughter who watched them lose everything they thought they'd already won. To understand why that email felt like a knife, you have to understand what kind of family the Ashworths pretended to be. On the outside, we were the family everyone envied. Roger and Denise Ashworth, married 34 years, 2 kids, a modest split-level home in a quiet Denver suburb, church every Sunday, a family group chat full of heart emojis. My father built a small roofing company from nothing. My mother taught 3rd grade for 26 years. We weren't rich. We were the kind of family that called itself comfortable, and meant it as a compliment. I was the oldest. From the time I was a teenager, I absorbed a role nobody assigned me out loud but everyone expected me to play. The responsible one. The one who got straight A's so my parents wouldn't have to worry. The one who worked a part-time job at 16 not because we needed the money desperately, but because it felt like my job to make things easier. Meanwhile Grant, 3 years younger, golden-haired, effortlessly charming, got to be a kid. He got to make mistakes. He dropped out of community college twice. He borrowed money for a sure-thing investment that evaporated in 8 months. Each time my parents said the same thing. He's still finding his way. Nobody ever said that about me. I wasn't allowed to still be finding my way. When my father's business nearly collapsed in 2011, I was 19 working retail and going to school part-time. I gave him almost every dollar I made for 8 months straight. I never asked for it back. When my mother needed testing done for a possible kidney donation for my grandmother, I was the one who took unpaid leave to be there. While Grant sent a text that said, "Thinking of you guys, wish I could be there," from a music festival in Austin. I'm not telling you this to make myself sound like a saint. I'm telling you this because it matters for what comes later. Because when I started saving for that lake house, I wasn't buying my parents a gift. I was buying myself for the first time in my life proof that all of it had been worth something. Proof that the sacrifices meant something to the people I made them for. The lake house wasn't an impulsive decision. My parents had talked about Estes Park for over a decade. Quiet mornings on the water, my father finally slowing down, my mother finally having a garden that wasn't crammed into a tiny suburban yard. I started a separate savings account in early 2022. I picked up 3 new consulting clients. I stopped buying anything I didn't need. My best friend Priya used to tease me. Mallory, you've turned saving money into a personality. I didn't care. I had a picture in my head of my father standing on that lake dock, finally proud of the life he built. I wanted to be the one who gave him that. By early this year I had enough. I found the house myself. A 3-bedroom cabin on Lake Estes with a wraparound porch and a view my mother would have cried over. I put down an offer under my own name, planning to add my parents to the deed once everything closed. I told no one except my real estate agent and Priya. I wanted it to be a surprise on my father's 60th birthday, 3 weeks after closing. I had no idea that while I was planning the best gift of my life, my own family was in a group chat planning something else entirely. Looking back now, there were signs. Small ones. The kind you explain away because you don't want to believe the alternative. The first crack came in February, about 2 months before closing. I mentioned to my mother in passing that I was working on something big for Dad's birthday. I didn't give details. I wanted to keep the surprise intact. But instead of the excited curiosity I expected, my mother went quiet for a second too long, then asked carefully, "Is this something just for him or something for both of us?" It was a strange question. I brushed it off as her usual anxious phrasing. The second crack came when Grant started calling home every day. This was new. Grant, who used to go 3 or 4 months without checking in, was suddenly calling our parents daily, sometimes twice a day. When I asked my mother about it, she smiled in a way that felt performative and said, "He's just being more present lately. Growing up, I guess." I wanted to believe that. God, I wanted to believe that. The third crack came at Sunday dinner in March. My father made an offhand comment about a friend of his whose daughter had bought them a car, then put the title only in her own name. For tax reasons, the friend had explained, though everyone at the table understood it also meant control. My father said, almost too casually, "Smart keeping things in your own name until you're sure." I remember feeling a small cold pulse in my chest and telling myself I was being paranoid. My father wasn't talking about me. He couldn't be. The fourth crack was the one I noticed but didn't examine closely enough. My mother started asking specific questions about the closing process. Not excited questions, logistical ones. Whose name would be on the deed at signing? Whether I planned to add them immediately or down the road. Whether the property could be transferred later without extra tax consequences. I answered every question honestly, proud that I was being asked, thinking she was simply eager for details about her future home. I didn't yet understand that she wasn't asking as a future homeowner. She was asking as someone gathering intelligence. The fifth crack came from Priya, my best friend and the only person who knew about the purchase. In late March, she ran into my mother at a farmer's market. Denise mentioned, unprompted, that she'd been talking to a lawyer about updating some family paperwork. When Priya told me this over coffee the next day, I laughed it off. "Probably just updating their will, that's normal for people their age," I said. "I want you to notice something about all 5 of these moments. Individually, they meant nothing. A question here, a phone call there, a lawyer mentioned in passing. That's exactly how betrayal works when it comes from people who've spent your whole life teaching you to trust them. It doesn't arrive as a single dramatic blow. It arrives in pieces small enough to swallow one at a time, until the day you finally see them laid out together. And realize you swallowed a plan." 3 weeks before closing, I threw my father a 60th birthday dinner at his favorite steakhouse in Denver. I'd already told the real estate agent I wanted final walkthrough photos ready. I planned to print one, frame it, and give it to him that night as a teaser, with the real keys to follow after closing. I wanted him to have something to hold in his hands, something that made the dream feel close enough to touch. The dinner started warm. My father laughed more than I'd seen him laugh in years. My mother wore the blue dress she saved for special occasions. Grant showed up 20 minutes late with his girlfriend, Whitney, a woman I'd met maybe 4 times in 2 years, who spent most of dinner scrolling through real estate listings on her phone under the table, though at the time I assumed she was just bored. When dessert came, I handed my father a small wrapped frame. Inside was a printed photo of the lake house exterior. The one I'd fallen in love with the moment I walked through the door. Cedar siding, a wraparound porch, Lake Estes glittering behind it. I watched his face as he unwrapped it, and for a second it was everything I'd imagined. His eyes went glassy. His hands shook slightly around the frame. "Mallory," he said, voice cracking. "What is this?" "It's yours," I told him. "Both of yours. I close on it in 3 weeks. I wanted to give you something real this year. Not just a card." My mother started crying. Real tears, or tears that looked real enough that I believed them completely. She hugged me so tightly I nearly lost my breath. My father kept saying, I don't understand, over and over. Like the words themselves could slow down what was happening. But here's the detail I didn't register that night, the one that only makes sense now. Grant didn't say a single congratulatory word to me. Not one. He hugged our father, he clinked his glass, he said, "This is huge, Dad." But he never once looked at me, never once said thank you or "That's amazing, Mal." At the time I told myself he was just processing it, maybe feeling a little embarrassed about the $11,000 he still owed me. I told myself a lot of generous things that night. What I didn't know was that Grant left that dinner, and according to phone records I'd later see referenced in the very email that changed everything, called our mother from the restaurant parking lot before he'd even gotten in his car. The conversation, I'd later learn, lasted 6 minutes. 6 minutes while I was still inside paying the bill, glowing with pride, thinking I had just given my family the best night of their lives. I had no idea I'd actually just started a countdown. 3 days before closing, I drove to my parents' house to drop off a signature page my father needed for the mortgage co-signing paperwork. A formality, since I'd offered to let his name appear as a resident on record for insurance purposes, though the deed itself would be solely mine until I formally transferred it. He wasn't home. He was at a job site. My mother let me in, said she had a work call in the other room, and told me to leave the papers on the kitchen counter. I set the folder down. Her laptop sat open beside it, the screen still glowing from whatever she'd last been doing, her email inbox visible. I wasn't looking for anything. I reached across the counter for a pen, and my eye caught the subject line of an open email thread, still displayed on the screen because she hadn't closed the window. Ashworth Family Trust, removing Mallory as beneficiary before property transfer. I stood completely still. Then, and I'm not proud of this, but I want to be honest with you, I read it. I read the whole thread. It was between my mother and a family law attorney named Patricia Voss. The most recent message, sent 4 days earlier, laid out a plan in clean clinical language that didn't sound anything like my mother's warm, misty-eyed voice at that birthday dinner. The email confirmed that once the lake house closed and my parents' names were added to the deed, which I had already agreed to do as a gift, they intended to have me sign a quitclaim transfer within the following month, moving my ownership share entirely into a new family trust controlled jointly by my parents and Grant. The stated reasoning, written in my mother's own words further down the thread, was this: Mallory has always been the responsible one. She won't fight us on this if we frame it as protecting the family. Grant needs this more than she does right now, and honestly she'll be fine either way, she always is. I read that sentence 4 times. She'll be fine either way, she always is. Below that, the attorney had also attached a separate, older document, dated 6 months earlier, outlining changes to my parents' will. My name had been removed as a beneficiary of the family roofing business entirely, with Grant listed as sole heir, due to his greater need for financial stability and his commitment to carrying on the family name through the business. There was no mention of the lake house purchase in that older document because 6 months ago the lake house didn't exist yet. It had been added to the trust plan later, folded into a strategy that had started before I ever bought them anything at all. My hands were shaking. I heard my mother's voice through the wall, still on her work call. Except it wasn't a work call. I could hear Grant's name. I stepped closer to the hallway, close enough to hear without being seen, and what I heard next is the moment I stopped being their daughter and started being a witness to my own family's plan to erase me. My mother's voice was low, but the hallway carried it clearly. She has no idea, Grant, I promise you. She thinks this is just generosity. That's the problem with your sister. She's never once questioned what's fair. She just gives and gives. There was a pause, and I could hear Grant's voice faintly through the phone speaker, tinny and distant, saying something I couldn't fully make out except for the words closing and make sure. My mother answered. Patricia said, once your father and I are officially on the deed, we file the quitclaim within 30 days. Before Mallory has time to think twice or talk to a lawyer of her own. It has to happen fast, while she's still riding the high of giving us the gift. That's when people don't ask questions. I remember the exact physical sensation of hearing that. A cold drop starting in my chest and spreading down through my stomach, like ice water poured slowly into my body. I wasn't imagining anything anymore. This wasn't a misunderstanding I could explain away like the 5 cracks before it. This was my own mother, in her own kitchen, describing a strategy to take something from me before I had time to think twice. She kept talking. Your father feels guilty, but I told him, Mallory's not the one who needs this house to build a life. She's already stable, she's already successful. She doesn't need her name on anything to be okay. You do. You and Whitney need a fresh start. And this gives it to you without either of us having to hand you cash we don't have. It's not stealing, Grant, it's just redirecting toward the child who actually needs it. Redirecting. That was the word she used. Not lying. Not betraying. Redirecting. Then she said the sentence that I will remember for the rest of my life. The sentence that ended 29 years of believing my family loved me the way they said they did. Mallory's always been the strong one. Strong people don't need to be protected the way you do. She'll be upset for a while and then she'll get over it because that's what she does. That's who she is. I didn't cry. I want you to understand that clearly because I think you might expect me to have cried right there in that hallway and I didn't. Something in me went very still and very cold instead, the way water goes still right before it freezes solid. I picked up my bag, walked quietly back through the kitchen, and left the folder of signature papers exactly where I'd set it down. I got in my car, drove 2 blocks and pulled over, because my hands were shaking too hard to keep driving safely. Then I called the one person who had known about this house from the very beginning. Priya answered on the second ring. I don't remember exactly what I said first, only that it came out in fragments: trust, quitclaim, 30 days. She'll be fine either way. Priya, who has known me since college and has never once let me talk myself out of my own worth, went quiet for a moment and then said the only thing that made sense. Mallory, do not sign anything. Not one piece of paper, not for anyone until you talk to a lawyer of your own. Today. I spent that night not sleeping. I read the email thread again from a screenshot I'd taken with shaking hands before I left the kitchen, because yes, I went back in, told my mother I forgot my sunglasses, and photographed the screen while she was in the bathroom. I'm not ashamed of that. Some situations don't call for good manners. They call for evidence. The next morning, I called a real estate and family law attorney named Marcus Feldman, recommended by a former consulting client of mine who'd gone through a messy inheritance dispute of her own. I laid out everything. The purchase, the deed still solely in my name, the plan to add my parents after closing, the trust email, the will amendment, the overheard phone call. Marcus listened without interrupting, then said something that reframed the entire situation for me. Here's the good news, Mallory. Right now, before closing, you hold all the power. The house is not their asset. It's yours. Nothing has been signed away yet. The only mistake would be proceeding as if none of this happened. He advised me on exactly what to do step by step, and for the first time since that hallway, I felt something other than ice water in my chest. I felt something closer to clarity. Over the next 3 days, I didn't confront anyone. I didn't call my mother screaming, didn't send an accusatory text to Grant, didn't do anything that would tip my hand before I was ready. Instead, I quietly did 4 things. First, I instructed my agent to proceed with closing exactly as planned, with the deed remaining solely in my name, with no mention to my parents that anything had changed, because in their minds, nothing had changed yet. Second, I had Marcus draft an ironclad clause preventing any transfer of the property for a minimum of 5 years without my sole written consent, folded into the trust structure I would eventually, and only eventually on my own timeline, set up for my parents' benefit. Third, I asked Priya to help me quietly gather every piece of financial history I had. Every payment I'd made toward my father's business in 2011, every dollar of the $11,000 Grant still owed me, every record proving exactly what I had given this family over the years freely, without ever once being asked to. And fourth, the part I'm not entirely proud of but don't regret, I decided the truth needed to come out in front of everyone at once, in a room where nobody could quietly explain it away afterward. My father's 60th birthday had already given them their big moment. I decided closing day would give me mine. Closing day arrived on a bright, cold Tuesday morning. I had told my parents I wanted them there to see the house become official. A plausible enough request, since I'd always planned to celebrate the moment with them. What I didn't tell them was that I'd also invited Grant and Whitney, under the guise of a small family lunch afterward to celebrate as a family. My mother sounded thrilled on the phone. "That's so thoughtful, honey," she said, and I had to grip the counter to keep my voice steady in response. We met at the title company's office at 10 in the morning. My parents wore their nicest clothes, clearly expecting a celebration. Grant arrived with Whitney 12 minutes late as usual, both of them looking a little too pleased with themselves for two people who supposedly had nothing to do with any of it. I signed the closing documents exactly as planned. Sole ownership, my name only, the 5-year transfer restriction quietly built into the file Marcus had prepared, invisible to anyone not looking for it. My mother watched with an expression of warm, patient anticipation, the same expression I now understood that a person wears when they believe a plan is unfolding exactly on schedule. When the paperwork was done, the title agent congratulated me and handed over the keys. My mother reached for them instinctively, and I closed my hand around them first, gently but firmly. "I've got these for now, Mom," I said, keeping my voice light. "There's actually something I want to talk through with everyone before we celebrate. Can we head to the house instead of lunch? I think it'll mean more if we do this there." Nobody argued. Nobody could. Not without raising questions they weren't ready to answer. We drove up together, 3 vehicles trailing along the mountain road toward Lake Estes, past the pines and the water finally coming into view, glittering exactly the way I'd imagined it the day I first walked through that door. I unlocked the front door of the house I had spent 4 years and every spare dollar earning, and I let my family walk into it one more time, believing it belonged to a plan they had already written. Then I closed the door behind us, turned to face my parents and my brother standing in the living room of the house I'd bought with my own hands, and I said, "Before we celebrate, I think we should talk about the family trust. And about a phone call I overheard 3 days ago." The silence that followed was the loudest silence I have ever experienced. My mother's face went from confusion to something closer to panic in under 3 seconds. My father looked between us, genuinely lost, and I realized in that moment, with some strange small relief, that he truly hadn't known the full extent of it. His guilt, as my mother had mentioned on the phone, was real. He simply hadn't had the courage to stop it. I didn't yell. I want to be honest about that because I think it surprised them more than yelling would have. I spoke calmly, the way Marcus had coached me to, laying out facts instead of accusations. I told them I'd seen the email from Patricia Voss. I told them I'd heard the phone call in the hallway, every word, including the phrase redirecting toward the child who actually needs it, including "she'll be fine either way, she always is." I watched my mother's face drain of color as she realized exactly how much I knew. Grant tried to speak first, predictably defensive. "Mallory, it's not what you think. We were just trying to figure out fair options for." "Don't," I said, and something in my voice must have carried enough weight that he actually stopped. "I'm not here to argue about what's fair. I'm here to tell you what's already true. This house is in my name only. It will stay in my name only for at least 5 years, by legal agreement I signed this morning. There is no quitclaim coming in 30 days. There's no trust transfer waiting to happen quietly while I'm too grateful to notice." My mother finally spoke, her voice cracking in the way it had at the birthday dinner. Except this time I couldn't tell anymore whether it was real. "Mallory, please, you're twisting this. We were only trying to help your brother get on his feet. We knew you'd understand eventually, you always understand." "That's exactly the problem," I said. "You built an entire plan around the fact that I always understand. Around the fact that I always forgive, always give, always get over it. You didn't ask me for help with Grant. You decided to take it from me without asking, and you decided that in advance I wouldn't fight back." I turned to my father, who hadn't said a word. "Dad, did you know about the will change? 6 months ago, before I even bought this house." He looked down at the floor, and his silence answered the question more completely than any words could have. That silence, my father's willingness to let it happen even without actively planning it, hurt in a different way than my mother's calculation did. It wasn't a stab. It was a slow, sinking realization that being loved by someone and being protected by someone are not always the same thing. I laid the folder Marcus had helped me prepare on the kitchen counter. The same counter where, 3 weeks earlier, I'd unwrapped a framed photo and watched my father cry with what I'd believed was pure joy. Inside was documentation of every dollar I'd given this family since I was 19 years old, the $11,000 Grant still owed me, and a single-page letter outlining exactly one condition for moving forward as a family: full transparency in writing about any future financial decisions involving me, my property, or my name, or I would step back from the family financially and otherwise permanently. I won't pretend the months after that day were easy. My mother didn't speak to me for 6 weeks. Grant sent one furious text calling me selfish, a word that landed with a particular kind of irony I didn't bother pointing out to him. Whitney, notably, never contacted me at all, which told me most of what I needed to know about how invested she'd really been in a house she'd been quietly scrolling listings for under a dinner table. But something shifted slowly in the months that followed. My father called me first about 7 weeks after closing day. He didn't apologize eloquently. My father has never been a man of many words, but he said something that stuck with me more than any grand speech could have. I let it happen because it was easier than telling your mother no. I'm sorry I made you the one who had to be strong enough to stop it instead of me. It wasn't a perfect apology. It was an honest one, and after everything, honest was worth more to me than perfect. My mother and I are still rebuilding. We talk now, carefully, the way two people do after a fault line has cracked open beneath a relationship they both thought was solid ground. She has never fully admitted that redirecting was ever the wrong word for what she tried to do, but she has stopped trying to explain it away entirely, which for her, I've learned, is its own kind of admission. Grant paid back $4,000 of the $11,000 he owed me, in installments without being asked twice. The first time in his life he's done something like that unprompted. I don't know if it's growth or guilt. I've decided it doesn't matter which, as long as the money shows up. As for the house, it still sits exactly where I found it, cedar siding catching the morning light over Lake Estes, the porch my father once cried over still empty of the rocking chairs I eventually did buy for him. Once trust had been partially rebuilt. My parents do stay there now several weekends a year. But the deed still says my name and only my name, and it will for exactly as long as I decide it should. Not because I stopped loving my family, because I finally understood that love without boundaries isn't generosity. It's just an open door that anyone can walk through and take what they want, as long as they're careful enough to frame it as care. I think about that hallway sometimes, my mother's voice through the wall, so certain that I would be fine either way that I always am. She was right about one thing. I am fine. But not because I got over it quietly the way she expected. I'm fine because for the first time in 29 years, I stopped being the daughter who fixes everything and became the daughter who finally protected herself first. And it turns out that version of me is the one who actually gets to keep the things she works for.